At first, nobody at Calder Point thought the bobcat was the problem. The problem, as far as anyone could tell at 5:43 in the morning, was that it was standing in the middle of the public boat ramp and refusing to leave. That alone was strange enough. The lake lay under a thin blue-gray dawn, wide and still, except for little folds of wind near the far shore, where the pines came right down to the water. Calder Point was never elegant, even on its best days. It was a working launch more than a scenic one. Two concrete ramps side by side, a floating courtesy dock chained to steel posts, a gravel lot with patched potholes, a fish cleaning station that permanently smelled like old scales and bleach, and a weather-beaten signboard listing rules nobody fully obeyed. By midday, it would be full of trailers, coolers, shouted backing instructions, and men pretending they knew exactly where the base were moving. But before sunrise, the place belonged to gulls, diesel engines, damp rope, and the low suck of water against the launch dock. A fog bank had drifted close to the surface overnight and was only just beginning to burn off. It hung in strips above the shallows like torn cloth. The concrete ramp gleamed dark with lake water and algae sheen. Reeds bent and rattled softly along the cove edge, where the shoreline curved away from the launch. Somewhere out on the lake, a loon called once, and the sound moved through the cold like something older than people. Martin Keene saw the bobcat first. He had been fishing Calder Point since before the county put in the second lane, which meant he had also been grumbling about Calder Point for just as long. At 68, he was broad through the shoulders, permanently windburned, and the kind of man who still backed his own aluminum boat down the ramp without help and took visible offense when anyone suggested otherwise. He came before dawn because he liked being on the water ahead of everyone else, when the fish were still close and the talkers were still asleep. He swung his truck into the launch lot, stopped halfway through setting the parking brake, and squinted through the windshield. The bobcat stood exactly where a trailer tire needed to go. Not at the edge of the brush, not slipping out of sight the way any sensible wild thing would have when headlights washed over the ramp. It was just there, lit flat in the truck beams, pale, tawny coat silvered by the mist, ears sharply tufted, body lean and tight with attention. Martin muttered, "What in the hell?" He actually expected it to run then. It didn't. It looked at him once, then down toward the waterline at the left edge of the ramp where the reeds thickened near the courtesy dock. That was the first thing that bothered him. The second was that it still didn't move when he opened the truck door. By then, another vehicle had come into the lot behind him, a younger man with a base boat and too much confidence in his trailer alignment. He rolled down his window, took one look at the scene, and laughed automatically because the alternative was more complicated. "That thing yours, Wishershivers," he called. Martin didn't take his eyes off the ramp. "You back over it, and I'll knock your lights out." The younger man laughed again, then saw Martin wasn't joking, and leaned forward to get a better look. The bobcat stepped 3 paces down the wet concrete toward the left shoulder of the ramp, stopped beside the water's edge, and stared into the reeds. Not at the men, not at the boats. The reeds. Martin set his coffee on the truck hood and moved slowly forward. He knew wildlife, not in any grand formal sense, but in the practical way people who spent most of their lives outdoors knew it. Deer crossed roads one way, when calm, and another, when panicked. Herons standing rigid at the shallows were working fish. Raccoons near boat ramps before dawn were after bait or guts. Bobcats, in his experience, did not hold ground in open human places unless something outweighed their fear. This one was not hunting him. It was not trapped. It was not wounded, at least not visibly. It was fixed on something by the water. By 5:50, 3 more fishermen had arrived and joined the widening semicircle of cautious male confusion at the top of the launch lane. Nobody wanted to be the idiot who got too close to a wildcat before sunrise. Nobody wanted to be the idiot who turned around and went home because of one either. So they stood there in boots and ball caps and jackets that smelled of bait and boat gas, all watching the same impossible tableau unfold. The bobcat paced once near the courtesy dock cleat, then returned to the exact patch of reeds beside the left ramp. It lowered its head, listened, and made a short, rough, throaty sound that was not a growl and not a meow. Then it looked back at the men. Martin felt his irritation drain away into something colder and sharper. "Something's in there," he said quietly. "Fish?" the younger guy offered, now less cocky. Martin gave him a look. At that moment, Hank Solis, the morning ramp attendant, came out of the booth carrying the launch box and yesterday's receipt clipboard. He was 57, wiry, and had the permanent expression of a man who had spent too much of his life explaining the same 5 rules to people who believed rules were for somebody else. He opened his mouth to complain about trucks blocking the lot, then followed everyone's stare and simply stopped talking. "Well," he said after a moment, "that's new." The bobcat turned, paced back up the ramp a few feet, then returned again to the waterline. Hank frowned. "It's not normal." "Thank you," Martin said. "We were all under the impression this was common marina procedure." But his eyes never left the reeds. Something there felt wrong in a way he could not yet name. The launch lane was quiet now except for idling engines and little ticks of cooling metal. A gull drifted over once and veered away. Wind moved the reed tops. Water lapped against the submerged end of the ramp with little flat sounds. Then the bobcat suddenly froze and looked hard at one specific patch of green-brown reeds just beyond the courtesy dock. Martin followed its gaze. At first he saw only stems and water-dark mud. Then color. A slash of red caught in the reeds. Not a flower, not a buoy. Fabric. He took 2 steps closer, a jacket, half submerged, snagged among the reed stalks, one sleeve twisted around itself, the waterline lapping at it in tiny dark ripples. Everything in the lot changed in that instant. The younger fisherman beside him swore softly. Hank dropped the launch clipboard. Martin was already moving down the edge of the ramp before anyone told him not to. The bobcat sprang backward out of his way and stopped 10 feet off, watching. The jacket was child-sized. That hit him before anything else. Small, puffy, red with gray panels on the shoulders, soaked nearly black along the bottom. One cuff drifted weakly in the water. It was hung just beyond where a person could comfortably reach from shore without stepping knee-deep into the reeds. "Jesus," Hank whispered. Martin scanned the reeds harder. There. Another shape. Something pale low against the mud and cattails. Not body-shaped exactly. Not enough to understand yet, but enough to turn his pulse into a hammer. He yanked his phone from his pocket and fumbled the emergency call with fingers that had always been steady around hooks and fillet knives and somehow now felt too big for a glass screen. Boat ramp, Calder Point, child's jacket in the reeds. Possible drowning or missing person. Send everybody. The dispatcher must have heard something in his voice because she stopped asking him to repeat himself after the first sentence. While he was still on the call, Hank did the one smart thing that later made Martin respect him more than he already did. He started yelling for nobody to go into the water. That probably saved 1 or 2 fools from making the morning worse. Because now everyone in the lot could see the jacket, and once people saw it, imagination did the rest. A child in the lake, a body in the reeds, a survivor trapped in the shallows. Panic made heroes out of idiots faster than any other force Martin knew. "Stay back," Hank shouted. "Nobody touches anything. Sheriff's coming." The bobcat circled the edge of the reeds and returned to the same spot again. Not the jacket itself, just beside it, as if the jacket were not the main point. That unsettled Martin more than the jacket had. Then he heard it, a tiny cough. Not from the men, not from the lot, from the reeds. He snapped toward the sound so fast his knees actually protested. "Did you hear that?" No one answered. Then it came again, a weak, wet child's cough from somewhere low and hidden in the grass just beyond the jacket. Martin felt the back of his neck go hot and cold all at once. "There's someone in there," he said. This time everyone heard it. No one in the lot moved for half a second. Then everyone moved at once. Hank swore and grabbed the throw ring from the post by the dock. The younger bass fisherman made for his trailer toolbox looking for a line. An older man in waders tried to step down the bank and got physically shoved back by Martin, who had suddenly remembered that blind rescues in reeds and cold water made bodies instead of headlines. "No!" he barked. "Hold for rescue!" The bobcat backed up from the commotion, then stopped again and sat in the gravel path beside the courtesy dock, eyes fixed on the reeds. Sirens reached them fast. County deputies first, then fire rescue, Then the volunteer Marine unit from the other side of the lake, because Calder Point's own skiff was out of service again, and nobody had gotten around to fixing what the county called budget reality. The lot filled with red and blue light flashing against mist and boat trailers. Morning on the lake split open into command voices, life jackets, rescue poles, medical bags, and the hard-clipped language of people trying not to say worst-case things out loud. Deputy Lena Morris took one look at the child-sized jacket, and her whole face sharpened. "Where?" Martin pointed. The bobcat, as if understanding the transfer of attention, stood and moved 2 paces along the reed edge, then stopped again near the same hidden point. Lena saw that too. "What's with the cat?" she asked. Martin shook his head. "Been here before any of us. Wouldn't leave." There was no time to discuss what that meant. A rescue swimmer went in first, tethered at the waist and moving slowly through the reeds with both hands out. The lake there looked shallow from the ramp, but the bottom dropped in strange shelves and soft mud pockets where old runoff channels cut through. Visibility was almost nothing. The jacket floated free when he reached it, and everyone in the lot had one awful, weightless second of believing that was all there would be. Then he shouted, "Got a child!" The boy was wedged in a cradle of reeds and brush roots just beyond the visible edge, one leg trapped between a half-submerged branch and the old wire remains of a fish habitat frame someone had sunk years ago. He had not been fully underwater. That was the miracle. But close enough that cold, shock, and exhaustion had already dragged him toward the edge. His jacket had come off or been pulled off in the struggle to stay above the surface. He was muddy, shaking weakly, and far smaller than Martin had braced himself for. Maybe 5, maybe 6, alive. The lot seemed to breathe all at once. The rescue swimmer cut the entangling wire, passed the boy to the second responder at the waterline, and the whole scene pivoted from fear toward desperate relief. Medics were down the bank before the boy's feet cleared the reeds. A foil blanket flashed silver in the dawn. Somebody in the crowd began crying loudly. Somebody else crossed himself. Hank sat down on the trailer hitch of his own utility cart because his knees apparently made the decision for him. The child coughed lake water, screamed once when the medics touched his leg, and then clung to the lead paramedic's sleeve with a grip that looked far too strong for how pale he was. "What's your name, buddy?" she asked. His lips shook. "Noah." Deputy Morris was already on the radio, running the name against local overnight calls. The answer came back almost instantly. "Missing child. Reported at 4:11 a.m. Cabin loop at Cedar Pines RV Park on the North Shore. Male, 6 years old. Name, Noah Whitaker." His family had woken before dawn to find the cabin door ajar and the boy gone. Search teams had gone toward the main road and the campground bathhouse, assuming he had wandered toward lights and people in the dark. No one had thought to search the public ramp 2 coves over. Martin looked toward the lake and then at the red jacket in the reeds and tried not to imagine the missing hours between those 2 points. Noah was loaded into the ambulance conscious, crying, and furious enough at the strangers around him that the medics relaxed half a degree. "Good sign," one of them muttered. "Very good sign." A second crew stayed behind to document the scene, while deputies redirected the growing crowd away from the water. That was when Deputy Morris looked back toward the courtesy dock and said quietly, "Where'd the cat go?" Everyone near her turned. The bobcat was still there, sitting on the weathered planks at the edge of the dock now, body angled toward the ambulance as if it too was taking inventory of who was leaving and in what condition. No one approached it, no one tried. The animal had ceased to feel like a threat long ago. It was simply one more impossible fact standing inside the morning. Martin watched it for one stunned second more. Then the ambulance doors shut. The bobcat rose. It looked once toward the reeds where the jacket still hung damp and red against the green, once toward the lot full of boats that had not launched, and then, with the sort of neat, unanswerable grace wild things always carried even when the world around them was clumsy and loud, it stepped off the dock, trotted along the gravel edge by the fish cleaning station, and disappeared into the brush behind the maintenance shed without a sound. Just like that. Gone. No dramatic pause. No last look held too long. Just absence returning to a space everyone had suddenly been building meaning around. The rest of the morning was statements and waiting and the awkward, embarrassed relief of people realizing the story had not ended at the Reeds. Noah's parents arrived from Cedar Pines in time to catch the tail end of the scene, his mother half running across the lot while his father spoke to deputies in the flat, broken cadence of a man who had not fully returned to his own body yet. Martin did not hear everything they said and did not want to. He heard enough. The cabin door had not latched in the night after Noah's father stepped out for firewood. The boy had gone chasing frogs the evening before and kept talking about boats at the lake. He must have woken disoriented and wandered downhill in the dark, following the road until he reached the launch. The jacket came off in the water. The reeds kept him alive long enough for morning, and the bobcat had kept people looking at the exact patch of shoreline where the difference between life and death was narrowing by the minute. By noon, the story belonged to the county. By evening, it belonged to the internet. A bobcat blocked the launch. A bobcat led fishermen to a missing boy. A wild cat kept watch over a drowning child. Every version got louder, shinier, more certain. Martin hated all of them, not because the animal hadn't mattered, it had, but because people always tried to either turn the strange into a miracle or flatten it into coincidence, and both felt dishonest. The truth was stranger and simpler. There was a bobcat by the ramp. It would not leave. Then he saw the jacket in the reeds. That was enough. For the next week, every person who launched at Calder Point looked twice at the reed line. The county cut back the growth near the courtesy dock, removed the old wire fish frame, and put up new warning signs about deep drop-offs and children near the ramp. Cedar Pines changed its cabin door latches before the weekend was out. Noah came home from the hospital with stitches in one shin, a frightening story he only half remembered, and a refusal to let anyone throw away the stuffed otter the medic had given him in the ambulance. Martin saw him once later at the grocery store with his mother. The boy stared at him with the open, solemn attention children reserve for people who have crossed briefly into the story of their lives, then hid behind his mother's leg when Martin nodded hello. That was enough, too. 3 mornings after the rescue, Martin came down to the ramp again before dawn. The lot was empty. Fog lay low on the water. The courtesy dock bumped softly against its posts. He stood with his tackle bag in one hand and coffee in the other, looking toward the reeds without really meaning to. Movement flickered by the maintenance shed. A bobcat stepped into the pale edge of morning. Maybe the same one, maybe not. Young, lean, pale against the gravel. It looked toward the launch once, then toward the lake, then slipped back into the brush so quietly that if Martin had blinked, he would have missed it. He stood there a while longer. Then he set down his coffee, walked to the reed line, and checked it himself before launching the boat.